Good morning, Heather and Lenore, and good morning to all of you out there. I'm just going to look to see who's here so I can wave to you all. Feel free to wave to each other.
Good morning. I see some kids out there in Zoom land.
Hello. Hi to the people on Facebook.
Hi, people on Facebook. And hi to people watching this in the future on YouTube. And to people watching this in the distant future on our historical archives. On whatever digital format it ends up on. I am, and hi to anyone who's joining us for the first or second or third or fourth time. We're so glad that all of you are here. And those of you joining us for the, 451st time too. I am Reverend Israel. I'm the minister of this congregation, and I use he, him for pronouns.
I'm Heather Guerin-Rice. I'm a member of this congregation. I use she and her, and I'm today's worship associate.
And I'm Lenore Bajar-Dukes, and I use she and her pronouns, and I serve as the director of Lifespan Faith Development.
And it really is our pleasure to welcome all of you here this morning to this, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Lancaster's virtual worship service, coming to you live on Facebook and live on Zoom. Well, maybe 7 seconds later on Facebook, but live on Zoom anyway. It's our pleasure to welcome you to this spiritual community, this progressive spiritual community where we come together, where we join together to nourish the spirit, to connect in love, and to live for justice. All of you are welcome here with all of your beliefs and your doubts, your questions, and your curiosities. We welcome all of you here, no matter who you love, no matter where you come from, no matter what questions you have or doubts about religion and spirituality. We're so glad that you're here with us to journey, to grow in love, and to live and to discover together how to live lives filled with love.
And so we gather in community, a community of all ages, a community of many identities, because we need one another. We all carry a piece of wisdom and truth. And so we come here together, virtually but together, to share our truths with each other, and in the process to discover this beautiful complexity of the world. We are gathering in community because, especially during this time of pandemic and distancing, gathering is an act of survival and hope.
We warmly welcome anyone who is new here. We know that entering into a spiritual community as a newcomer can be intimidating, but we're so glad that you're taking the brave step of checking us out. We hope that you will feel connected to what goes on here, even through the screen across distance and digital space. We hope you will find folks to chat with, and we hope we will meet you someday in person. If you'd like to find out more about what goes on here, we encourage you to sign up for a newsletter by visiting our website. And Reverend Israel, would you welcome us into sacred space by lighting our chalice, please? The light of the sun does not lift the shadows that have fallen on humanity the world over. We relight our chalice flame to reignite a spirit of radical optimism, knowing it takes us all living what matters, to dispel those who would divide us. All manner of things will be well if we make them well. May our free religious communities embody the right relationships our world so desperately needs.
The morning hangs a signal upon the mountain crest, while all the sleeping valleys in silent darkness rest. From peak to peak it flashes, it laughs along the way, till the glory of the sunlight on all the land shall lie. Above the generations, the lonely prophets rise, while truth flares out as day star within their glowing eyes, and other eyes beholding are kindled from that flame, and dawn becomes the morning when prophets love proclaim. The soul has lifted moments above the drift of days, when life's great meaning breaketh in sunrise on our ways. Behold a radiant token of faith above all fear. Night shall release its splendor, that morning shall appear. That morning shall appear.
Great. I think I needed that extra little bit of upbeat reminder that morning shall appear on this morning when I got an extra an hour less of sleep. And I'm guessing many of you did too. So hi, Eleanor. Is Lenore spotlit too?
Yep,
Okay.
I'm here.
Hi, Lenore. I was in gallery view. I was still looking at everyone to say hi.
It's quite a week.
Yes.
I've been spending a lot of time outside lately because the weather's getting nicer. How about you?
I have been trying to, yeah, I did go for a good walk this week. And I was really taking note of some of the trees that I saw blooming and different flowers that I saw coming up. I think it's really like, even though I'm tired this morning, like I am on many mornings, seeing that on my way here does really help. And I was looking out at our sidewalk this morning, all of the cool messages on our sidewalk for the COVID grief memorial that we're doing. Some really beautiful messages on the sidewalk, and mournful ones too.
It's a time of remembering.
Yeah.
I've been walking around, smelling the air a little bit, and just noticing even the way that the air feels and smells and tastes. It reminds me a lot of this time last year. I keep getting these flashes of memory to this time last March.
Yeah, I know we talked about that. So we talked about that earlier this week when we were preparing for worship. I think it really had a really profound impact on me when you brought this up, when you mentioned, how we are, at this past week, we were at the 1-year anniversary of when we started going to lockdown and when the first cases of COVID were found locally, and when there was really just a lot of fear and uncertainty in our midst. But there was something about the image of, I was in Oregon at the time, but there was something about reminding me to think about the way the light was shining and the way the grass was just starting to turn green, at least where I was, and flowers were starting to come up. And it really evoked this sense of deja vu for me, because I actually had to move. We had an emergency in our apartment about a year ago too, where we had a flood in our apartment and we had to move out into a hotel.
Oh no.
Same thing. And the same thing happened to us this past week too, not because of a flood, but because of some other things in our apartment. So it's really strange kind of sensation of remembering what it felt like to be back at the start of the pandemic.
I wonder what others are feeling right now and remembering as we're talking. One thing I've been remembering is just how much everything seemed strange and new at that time. Like every little part of my life suddenly seemed called into question. Whether that was, the big stuff, like, do we need to cancel the Lancaster Interfaith pilgrimage, right? And we did. But also, like, what food do I have stored in my house, and how can I get more? And am I going to need to compost a lot more so that I can grow things this summer? And, am I going to be able to see my parents, and when? Like, all of those things, I just was suddenly paying attention to these things that seemed like, maybe because of the privilege of the life that I was leading, seemed like background noise or just givens before that. And so I think just when something suddenly upends your world, you tend to like notice things, important things just a little bit differently. So is there something that you noticed around that time that you remember?
Yeah, well, the thing about food was really interesting because it was the first time in my life where I ever had a thought in my mind, like, am I going to be able to go to the grocery store and get food? And that was a really profound thought for me, to think about, where my food comes from and what I would do if I couldn't go to the grocery store and get food. And really, I think that was frightening. And I think a lot of people probably were experiencing that too. I remember at that time when people were hoarding toilet paper. There was a message I saw on social media from a mother who was recorded herself sobbing because she said she couldn't afford to. People were also hoarding diapers at the time too, I remember, and said that she could not afford to buy diapers in bulk, and she didn't know how she was going to put diapers on her own baby. And there was that really profound sense that I felt in that moment of, like, the ways we act towards each other have always affected. We say, because our faith, we believe in the interconnected web, that our actions have profound implications for each other. But that was a moment where I really noticed, like, how some people hoarding things really were having a strong effect on other people, and it was really moving for me. And we had a 3-month-old at the time, so I think it was that really kind of got to me at that moment. But one beautiful thing that I do remember from that time was that there was so much talk about solidarity. There's so much talk about, we're all in this together, how we are finally discovering how to build new ways of being with each other. And there was this sense, at least for like a hot second, that the world was in the midst of change, that the world was about to change for the better, that something was about to dawn. Even in the midst of all of that fear, there was a recognition that people need rest, that Sabbath is an important concept, that people need to slow down. There were people learning how to garden, learning how to grow their own food. There were videos of people singing in the streets, singing outside of their windows into the streets at each other. There was this really beautiful sense. We got a glimpse, I think, for a moment a year ago, of something beautiful that our world could become. And I'll never forget that.
It's kind of painful actually to think about right now, because I too had this sense of great hope, I think, that we were going to slow down and honor life and prioritize people who are vulnerable and figure out what we needed to do without. And I think individually, pockets of us really did figured out how to do that. Neighbors in solidarity with each other, workplaces being able to try to care for their employees, and people, parents doing their best for their kids. But then as a whole society, I remember thinking, this is our greatest generation moment. Like, this is the time when we're going to really do it. We're going to really show up for each other, and make sacrifices. And then it turns out, as a society, we didn't. And a lot of people paid a lot of costs for that, not only with their lives, but with just the stress and the having to figure out what to do and making impossible choices, and parents making impossible choices. And so there's been, at least for me, that was quite a spiritual injury, I think. seeing that happen, seeing the choices that we decided to make as a society.
Yeah.
I do think, I do think it's important to have these types of conversations and this kind of remembering, just to keep, at least to keep that sense of what was important and that glimpse of like what, at least spiritually, right? What was revealed to us as really important, and what we can take from that going forward.
I think, I don't know, I'm feeling like a really profound sense of sadness just hearing you say that in some ways. And there's something about just talking right now that like hit me about the profound grief of this moment. Not only the profound grief for like a vision for our world that could have been that we missed the mark on, and a profound grief for a time when we really could have come together, and maybe we did for a second. But just, I'm a very idealistic, hopeful person. I know that's why I became a minister. And the thought that like we had this moment and we missed it. I don't know. I just needed a second. I'm sorry. But I think, I mean, that's why we come here, right, to this place, is to have those moments where we can catch those glimpses of the way our world could be and of how we could be better for each other.
And
To have
maybe,
realizations.
yeah, it's just occurring to me that maybe even it's more important than ever if a whole society isn't going to look at why Black and brown bodies are more exposed to COVID, and why our work systems aren't transforming equally and equitably, and we're not going to necessarily as a society hold on to that memory, like to come here with a countercultural place like UUCL, right? And like to gather together to hold on to that memory, because as like the whole culture's memory sweeps on, to like have each other to help remember and to help hold on to what's important in a countercultural way seems even more radically important than it might have seemed last year. So
I couldn't have said it better myself. That is why we are here, to help each other remember. And that's why we're here this morning.
I see some people in the chat are remembering where they were, what they were thinking about this time last year. And I'm just wondering if, as we go into our music in a little bit, if you want to share with each other, you know, we've shared what we've noticed that's really vital, that sense of solidarity, that idea of coming together. Like, to me, that's vital for nourishing the spirit. Remembering is vital for nourishing the spirit. But did you notice something around this time last year, during this whole year, that you had, or that you didn't have, or that you lost, or that you had to create for yourself? Something that you noticed that's really vital to you. Go ahead and put that in the chat, or maybe ask a family member to put it in for you. And we'll just invite you to take in other people's sharings in community in our music.
And I chose this song, by the way, because I needed a reminder that we do have the power to remind each other of our visions. And I don't know when, but I do believe that someday, soon, the day will arrive when at least we are working actively towards a more beautiful world. And maybe it's already here, I don't know.
ילדים בחופשה ישחקו טוב לשאת בין הבית לבין השדות. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה.
day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunderclouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Some have dreamed, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and their vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with new hope and not in sorrow, and the promise to make a new start. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me.
So as a reminder for all of these things, that all these emotions and grief that we are feeling about this past year, we have offered a space in front of our building, and actually the Lancaster Interfaith Coalition is offering spaces across Lancaster, at the seminary, at Lancaster Theological Seminary, and some other churches and synagogues and other houses of worship, because the Islamic Center downtown and the Moravian Center downtown as well have spaces on their sidewalk with chalk for anyone to come out and express the grief or the hope that they are feeling from this past year, in art, through words. And it's a public gathering and grieving space for us right now. And for us here too, in this moment together, we are here because we need each other in times like these, in all ways, to carry the burdens and the sorrows that life brings. And yes, to celebrate and rejoice and know that we are here and alive and breathing, and that there are beautiful moments in life too. Sometimes sorrow and joy come together, and sometimes the emotions are too complex to put into words, and sometimes the emotions are not even formed yet. But we have each other to make sense of all these things, to make meaning of everything that life brings. And we have our space here to nourish each other. This water comes from our well of community. It's filled with some water from our water ceremony at the beginning of the year. It holds all of our stories. And now this space holds your stories too, because I invite you to share the joys, the sorrows, and the complex truths that are on your heart this morning. So as you examine your heart this morning, I invite you, if you need the love and the support of this community, to share with us the thing that is on your heart. You can type it into the chat in 15 words or less. If you want us to share your name, you can write your name in your text. Otherwise, we won't share it. And if you're on Facebook, if you're watching on Facebook too, you can type it into the chat and we'll share it here too. And as you do, I will fill our cup as a reminder that we are here to fill each other's cups and to share a toast and to share nourishment with one another.
This week, I was able to hug my partners for the first time in a year.
From Naomi, grateful I was able to receive my first vaccine yesterday.
I so appreciate all those who have made these services happen.
My son's best friend broke up with him this week. He has a broken heart.
From Leslie, a stone for my daughter, Nicole.
I'm sorry, Leslie, I don't have the stones by me, but I will add some water for you.
Sue's missing friends and family and hoping to be able to travel this summer.
From Karen Roberts, I'm grateful my mother is much healthier. I am able to see her and hug her.
Please pray for Efren Rivera and family.
Glad I'm alive.
Well, for everything that we are experiencing, all of the joys, sorrows, complex truths, ones that remain in our hearts because they are still in formation, and ones that are yet to come. I add some more water to our cup as a reminder that here in this communal space, we come to draw sustenance and nourishment, to see our cups runneth over, because we need each other to survive. For all that you bring here to this space, and all of those who we need who are not yet here, I raise this glass, flowing over for all of us. I invite you now to take a moment to be here together, to breathe in this moment, to simply remember that you are alive here for one more day, to remember that all of us are living and breathing, while some struggle to breathe, and some find their cups empty. To remember that we are living, breathing beings on a cosmic scale indistinguishable from plants. And that every plant, just as every plant has its requirements to grow and thrive, requirements of light and water, temperature, so do people. When we're born, when we come into this world, we each arrive on the shores of a chaotic wilderness. We search for shelter. We seek to try to understand our chaotic world. We taste different berries, the ones that nourish us and the ones that leave us delirious for weeks. And we seek to share and gain knowledge from one another about which berries to taste and which to avoid. And slowly, through trial and error, we learn to understand the landscape, the wilderness in which we live. And slowly, we taste the sweet berries and sometimes the bitter ones, but we share them with one another. And slowly, we stumble through the wilderness sometimes and we fall. And then we get back up and we help each other back up. My friends, don't be ashamed of your stumbles and your falls, even the scars that you have from your falls. Because you are here, and we are here together, stumbling and falling and making sense of all of this wilderness that we find ourselves in. And you are here, wild and whole, and we are stumbling together.
And when I rise, let me rise like a bird joyfully. And when I fall, let me fall like a leaf gracefully, without regret. And when I stand, let me stand like a tree, strong and tall. And when I lie, let me lie like a lake, peacefully, calm and still. And when I work, let me work like a bee, wholeheartedly. And when I play, let me play like a breeze, fresh and cool, light and clear.
In 2015, I walked into a black room with 4 black walls and all these plastic movable chairs all around those walls, a theater room. And magic happened. I was with maybe 20, 25 other people that I had just met who would be my learning community over the next 2 years. There was a line of people, so we sat down, and there was a line of people who were dressed in rainbow shirts and black trousers who were singing as they were walking up the makeshift aisle, and it was dark in that theater room, and they were creating this sense of something really special. And then they invited us forward one by one to share our stories. And we did. People came up and sat in that hard plastic chair, and the interviewer asked them questions about their lives, and they answered. There were hard moments, funny moments, and then the actors, as we sat and watched, played back those stories live right there in front of all of us. And those people who were strangers weren't strangers anymore. Have you ever had an experience like that where you walk into a room in one state of being and then you leave that room when something really special happened that changed you or that changed who you were in relationship to other people? That's what it was like for me. And I loved it so much, I asked to know more at the end about this practice of playback theater that we had just experienced at Eastern Mennonite University. There was a violinist there. I remember talking to her. Her name was Katrina, and she invited me to a workshop that they were having that weekend. And I thought, I'm really busy and I don't want to make any new commitments. I'm not really an artist anymore. I'm not really sure about this, but I had loved it so much that I showed up. And I was hooked. We did silly exercises of stretching and jumping, and we did yes and exercises of improvisation where we would just go with whatever came into our minds and amplify the thing that the other person was doing. We learned about the practice of playback theater, how we make a container out of ritual to hold people's stories. And that part I knew. That part felt very exciting and very familiar to me. And yet there was stuff that felt really unfamiliar too, like making strange sounds all together in a circle, ooh, ooh, harmonizing and disharmonizing and lifting our voices and not worrying too much about what it would sound like or about perfectionism. It felt kind of like stretching into a new skin. Have you ever really like stretched into something different? That it felt kind of good moving my body in that way, but also very vulnerable and a little bit scary. But it also felt like coming home. You see, I grew up Unitarian Universalist, as a lot of you know, and something about that practice of just sitting and listening really deeply to the story that somebody else was sharing about their life, and then honoring it by playing it back. Not trying to add my own interpretation onto it, not trying to judge or anything like that, but just loving them in that moment and playing back their story. That felt to me like the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And I joined the troupe, the playback theater troupe, and that felt to me like taking one more step into the interconnected web of life, of which we are all a part. And for years and years, playback theater has nourished my spirit. So fast forward a couple years to when I moved to Pennsylvania. One of the first things I did after I found the UU Church, I looked for a playback theater troupe, and sure enough, there was one, and I joined it. And we had more rehearsals, and I kept on stretching my body and doing funny things on stages. I am not somebody who actually likes talking in public. You might not know this since I show up every week and I'm on camera, but it was playback theater that got me comfortable enough to be both fully present in the moment, trying my best to listen to everything that's around me, and also lifting my voice and sharing it with other people. I don't think I'd be here if it weren't for the practice with playback theater. And then the pandemic came. And like a lot of other aspects of life, we took a pause and then we moved to Zoom. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do arts or improvisational anything, or even using your body over Zoom, but it is not the same. It is not the same at all. So one really key aspect of playback theater is actually, it's like any kind of improvisational theater. We use our bodies in conjunction with each other. So we get used to not really talking about it, but like if someone tells a story about something sad that happened with their dog, for example, one of us might just decide to be the dog, and sort of crouch down low, and another person might put their hand on the back, and somebody else might push this way, and we make a sculpture with our bodies. And so we had to figure out how to do all of that in this little box, which it turns out you can do. By the way, you can play with the camera. You can do a lot on Zoom. But the thing that had nourished my spirit the most had been that connection with other people, that liberation of my body and my voice. I said it felt like coming home to find playback theater, but I talked about how it was connected to my UU faith and my upbringing, but it was also helping me regain something in my own spirituality that I really hadn't practiced growing up, and that I'd kind of lost touch with, even the parts I had practiced with, and that's listening to my own body as a source of wisdom. We can be very, very good about our intellectual capacities, and asking questions and talking, and I love that. But playback was one of the one spaces where I could go and just let all of that go, and just respond with me, just respond with my body, just speak without thinking in advance about what it would be, just leaning into that trust with the other actors. If you've ever done improvisational work, you know that you really have to trust your troupe. You have to trust the other people. Just leaning into that and going with it. And I come to count on that to kind of liberate my spirit, liberate my body from all of the kind of perfectionisms I layered on top of it, all of the wonderings, the anxiety. Like, you don't have room for that in playback. But on Zoom, we weren't really as spontaneous at first. It was tough. And even when we learned it a couple months in, all of a sudden I just got burned out. I'll admit I was on Zoom a lot with church. I was struggling to spend quality time with my family, even though I was home all the time with my son. I was worried that I wasn't giving him enough time in the evenings, enough quality time, and what had been life-giving before, if sometimes stressful to fit into my schedule, became a drag. I would show up for a 7 p.m. playback practice, and I would just be sort of like looking at the clock and wondering when I can get back to my crying toddler. And so this thing that had been one of my most important spiritual practices, I said goodbye to for a couple months. And that wasn't the fault of playback, and it wasn't the fault of me. It was just the moment that I was in. It was just the circumstances that all of us were in. And then somebody contacted our troupe and said that they really wanted us to work with them to remember somebody who was dear to them. And so all of a sudden we had a purpose again. And I found that even though I couldn't really summon the energy to be excited about gathering for this spiritual practice in general, I was really excited and determined to do this one thing. And so I came back to rehearsals, and we figured out how to do things on Zoom, and we gathered together, and it turned out to be a really important and meaningful experience. And I suddenly found that I was stretching again. And it felt good again, even though it was still on Zoom. And I was so glad. I was so glad that this thing that had been so important to me, that I had to say goodbye to for a little while, I'd had my rest. I'd had my time away from it. I'd been able to just be with my family and just kind of survive for a little bit of time. And now it was back for me again. And just like at the beginning when I first discovered what it was, it did feel like stretching and playing. And it also felt like wrapping a comforting blanket around myself again. Being with those other people, I'd been with them for years. being with my troop, with this community, it felt like coming home one more time. And I was so glad. I was so glad that I'd had this long practice to nourish my spirit when I needed it. Like coming home.
We're here because we get by with a little help from one another. Sometimes that's all we need. We're here because we are trying to nourish our spirits for one another together, imperfectly. We're here because we need this time once a week to be reminded of what is important. We need this time to remind ourselves that spirituality, that spiritual nourishment is not something that we can just compartmentalize for 1 hour on a Sunday. I grew up in a faith tradition where spirituality, I felt, was compartmentalized to a holy hour on a Sunday, where my spirituality, my understanding of faith was put into a box, where experiences of wisdom and grace and truth were put into a catechism, a list of questions and answers where every question had an answer, a very specific answer, where my questions were answered, but my questions were not encouraged either. And that was actually comforting as a child until I started to grow up a little bit, when my spirit no longer began to be fed by that experience. And maybe some of you are here because you experienced something similar. Or maybe you grew up in a space where there was no box at all and that was overwhelming and you needed some kind of a structure in which to put your understanding of spirituality. So when I left the faith of my upbringing, I left and I stopped going to any kind of a spiritual community. And when I realized that there was something lacking in my life, where there was some kind of spiritual nourishment lacking in my life, did I look in a church first to try to solve that problem? Frankly, no, I did not. I sought to nourish my spirit in many ways. Through theater, as an actor and a writer, I did theater, trying to nourish my spirit and other people's spirits through using my body to express emotions and convey universal themes and stories, kind of like what we do here. I explored it through gardening, by trying to connect to the earth. I found out about this thing called micro Sabbaths, which Lenore and I talked about earlier this week, which is when you have a brief moment in your day or in your week to remember to be, to just be, to be present, and to not have to do or create or produce something in that moment. I love micro Sabbaths, actually. A micro Sabbath looks like me stopping to appreciate the look of amazement and wonder and happiness on my daughter's face when I'm feeling stressed. Me stopping to appreciate something beautiful when I'm in the middle of answering emails. When I see the sunlight shining on my face through the window as I'm typing on my computer. There are many ways that I have sought to nourish my spirit, but the one that really stands out in my memory is when I had broken up with a long-term partner and I got a new roommate. And some of you might have heard me tell part of this story before, but I got a new roommate, and he was from Milan. He was from Italy, and we used to love talking about food together, about the recipes that we love to cook, and we would invite a bunch of people over to the house and just cook these huge, like, elaborate, complicated meals together. And a group of 10 or so of us, can you imagine 10 or 15 people sitting around a room at a table without masks, sharing glasses of wine, sharing food, singing with each other right now? Can you remember what that feels like, to sit around the table with someone, to share a story, to be in the presence of other people and relish it? Well, I remember those moments when I was actually in a point in my life where I was feeling very disconnected and sad and lonely. And it was gathering around the table with other people, which is a really simple thing. We all need to eat. We all need to eat. But something amazing happens when you share a meal with other people. And it wasn't just the sharing of the meal, but it was the sharing of stories and life experiences that truly made those moments transformational. And I remember one night being there, probably after a couple of glasses of wine or something like that, and feeling very happy, where we actually did spontaneously break out singing, which is not something that happened every time, but is a beautiful moment. And I sat there and I looked at the people that we were like raising our glasses and singing. And I looked at them all and I was like, I had a realization that, so I grew up in a faith tradition that practiced communion, which was a beautiful ritual for me when I was growing up. And then I lost a connection to it because it no longer felt meaningful to me. But in that moment, I was like, this is what communion is all about. Experiencing deep connection and understanding with people. And that's a moment that will always stay with me, where I felt like my spirit was truly nourished by being with other people. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to be around other people all of the time. But even as an introvert, I recognize deeply and profoundly that I do need other people. And maybe that's why you come here too. Because we need each other, my friends, to survive. We need to tell each other our stories. We need to raise our cups for one another. We need to share our stories honestly with one another. We need each other because life, like I said earlier, is like a chaotic wilderness sometimes. And there is constant change. And it is the constant ebb and flow of life that allows us to constantly be creating something beautiful. We're going to talk about our mission, the first part of our mission after the service today, which is to nourish the spirit. So I ask us all today, how do you nourish your spirit? And I leave you with this nugget. There's a phrase, I studied French for a while, and I'm not going to say the phrase in French, but there's a phrase that I remember reading about in French, and it was, the first bite is a feast. It was something like that. I don't know if anyone else who speaks French knows that phrase or has heard it before, but the first bite or the first taste is a feast. Life, being alive, is like a brief moment in time that we have, a flash in the history of the universe, to experience consciousness, to be here. Life is your first bite of consciousness. It is the first taste of what it means to be alive and being able to experience connection. Life, my friends, is a feast. It is to be savored. And feasts and nourishment are best enjoyed in the company of others. So while we're together, let's remember not to poison each other's food, but to share our recipes, to share the sweet berries, not the poisonous ones, and to savor it together, to nourish each other.
We gather in community because we know deep in our bones that we need each other to survive. We practice our interdependence here in many ways, by sharing our hearts with one another, by offering comfort and presence to one another, and by learning and growing together. And now we call ourselves to practice our interdependence by giving what we can to support the financial needs of this community. Because we are a community that practices its interdependence with the larger community, we share half of the offering with our community partners. In March, we share half of our offering with Assets Lancaster. Assets provides resources to empower women and Black, Indigenous, and people of color entrepreneurs to launch and grow inclusive and ethical businesses for our community. You can make all this possible by texting the amount of your donation to the number on the screen or by visiting our website. Thank you for your support.
Have you spent a lifetime looking to find a miracle or wonder that could change your mind? You ain't found no reason yet to believe, but maybe hope's got something yet left up her sleeve. Something beautiful, something natural, ordinary magic. Amazing that we have this chance to be here, to let our love vanish fear, and let our days overfill with ordinary magic. Have you felt the sunshine on your face? Have you heard the bird's version of Amazing Grace? Have you stood up on a mountain and tried to number the stars? Did you know that perfection is who you truly are? You're always magical, always beautiful. ordinary magic. It's amazing that we have this chance to be here, to let our love banish fear, to let our days overfill with ordinary magic. Like wind chimes, a child's song, the whisper of wind in the leaves, the moonlight, the wide open arms of a sycamore tree. That's just ordinary magic. It's amazing that we have this chance to be here, a chance to let our love disappear to fear, and let our days overfill with ordinary magic. Ordinary magic.
Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone.